Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NMIMS podcast. I'm your host, Srishti Jaisinghania, and today we have a very special guest with us, Mr. Sahil Nayar. He's Senior Associate Director at KPMG, and he has over a decade's experience in the financial services industry. And he is also passionate about education, development, and a lot more. We welcome you, sir. So, to begin with, how are you feeling about this podcast?
Oh, I'm really looking forward to this podcast because it's always a great opportunity. I have my own podcast on Spotify.
Right. That's
and
amazing.
it's nice to be with you today.
So, just to begin with, tell us about your work profile, your job profile. What all is incorporated in a typical day in the life of Mr. Sahil Nayar?
That's a very, very interesting question because many a times a lot of people, when they see my desktop, my office laptop, and I share my screen, they see my CV on the wallpaper and they go like, hey, why is his CV right there? Is he looking out for a job? And having spent 12 plus years in my current organization, I actually wrote an article called Paradoxically Millennial, because a lot of millennials keep changing jobs every couple of years, but I, being a millennial, have been with my organization for 12 years. The reason I've been with my organization for 12 years and the reason the CV is on my desktop is because every 6 months I like to do something different, right?
Amazing.
And that allows me to get myself out of my comfort zone. It allows me to try new things. It allows me to fail. And when I fail, it brings in a lot of humility because you realize that you cannot be good at everything. And then you challenge yourself to overcome the breakdown and create a breakthrough by actually building your skill sets in the new area that you are in. So a typical day, coming straight to your question, in my life would be figuring out not just how do I complete my to-do list, but also am I ticking my to-be list? What is it that I want to be? And am I heading in that direction? And every single day, am I doing something that is taking me slightly closer to where I want to be?
Amazing. That is so insightful. So, but how did it all start? Like at present, you have 60,000 plus LinkedIn followers, astounding experience in your field. And beyond all of that, you have a voice that you've created for yourself. How did it all pan out? What's your journey?
It started off by just having conversations with people. It started off by having a point of view on things that mattered. It started off by sharing that point of view with people. And I guess my followers, my audience was very kind enough. Maybe it resonated with them and they kept following. And that's how the word spread.
So, there's another thing that I couldn't help but have it stuck in my mind. Your LinkedIn headline states, humans first, resources later. What is that all about? Tell us about your philosophy.
Many a times, you studied it in perspective management or in planning or in organizational behavior and even in principles of management, that you have so many resources at our disposal. But ironically, we give a lot of importance to maybe capital, maybe money, maybe marketing, right? But my fundamental question always remains, who is the person who's raising funds for you? Who is the person who's taking your product to the rural parts of the country? Who is the person who is actually doing the procurement for you? It's always people. And I don't know why, but this really hurts me and it pains me to no extent when we call human beings as resources. Yeah, and therefore the tagline saying humans first, resources later.
So, while going through your profile, I couldn't help but just remember so many awards, so many honors in LinkedIn Top HR Award, TAPI Award, in particularly human resources in your field. So, clearly, being a people management specialist, you would have witnessed a lot of transformative journeys. You would have spearheaded a lot of transformative journeys. Any experiences from there?
Yeah, I think many a times we shouldn't get too carried away with these awards. Don't get me wrong. I'm extremely grateful and humbled and honored to have been a recipient of so many awards. But I think a lot of people let it get to their head, and then it just keeps bogging you down. I think I would rather look at it this way, that these awards are a testament to maybe the good work that I've had a good fortune to do over the years. But while the awards are great, and as I said earlier, not discounting them, I think it's the small things in this big world that truly matters. It's the small things. I'll tell you what happened last week, right? So last week, I had one of my students who I taught almost 15 years back. And at that point of time, I still vividly remember that he had mentioned that he wanted to become a pilot. And I said, wow, it's a lovely idea, you want to, but it's going to take a lot from you, because you're currently in a school where your entire fees are being paid by the government, right? Your background is not that great in terms of economics, and your parents are going to find it a challenge. But this is an intensive course. So you will need to build skill sets to be able to fund your education. And I also left him with one thing. I said, if you don't get what you want, at least try and get closest to what you want. And I think that really stayed with him. And last week, he video called me, and he was sitting with his parents, and he said, Sahil sir, this is my first flight that I have ever taken.
Wow, that is so remarkable.
And he said, I could have taken this flight a couple of years earlier, but I didn't want to do it. I wanted to do it with my parents, and I'm taking them for their first flight experience, and that too on an international holiday for 3 days. Now that to me,
Something else.
it is uncomparable to any kind of award. The fact that before taking off, he did a video call and just took me back to the time that we were in class together. It just felt so nice that he remembered me at that point of time, and the conversations we had back then. He worked on it every single day to take his parents on their first flight for an international holiday. Brilliant.
Beyond amazing. Right. So, a follow-up question to the previous question. Any experiences from the same people management domain that you do not look back at with a lot of joy and felicity?
See, many a times the dark side of life puts you at a crossroads, right? I'll repeat myself. Many a times the dark side of life puts you at a crossroad. I really applaud our forefathers, because for them, life was a lot more simple. And the reason why I say it was a lot more simple is because they had to choose between right or wrong. Yeah, and then they would hear their conscience and do whatever they wanted. Our parents' generation had a little bit of complexity because they had to choose between two rights. ये भी सही है, ये भी सही है. अभी हम क्या करें, right? But our generation has to actually choose between two wrongs. Many a times we are conflicted and put at such crossroads where we have to choose between two wrongs. If that wasn't enough of a problem, when I have my students come up to me with ethical dilemmas on which wrong should they choose, I think that becomes extremely difficult, because when you know that they look up to you as a role model, they take your advice seriously, you put a very heavy stone on your heart by telling them which wrong to choose.
I don't even know what to say to that. I've gathered that you're an MBTI practitionist and NLP practitioner, design thinking practitioner. What I'm referring to here is the continuous pattern of learning that percolates through your CV. So we talked about it in the beginning. I want to ask how important this learning is in the real world application. Like, it's very relevant to all of our students. We don't know how we're going to apply all of this. So
I'll go back to the famous movie Three Idiots, right? The dialogue is very famous, so I won't repeat that. But what I will definitely say is, even as a child, Three Idiots got released much later, but even as a child, the only way that I could clear my exams was to practically understand concepts and their applicability, and then write it in my own words. So if there's something that's not practical, it doesn't work. I'll give you a classic case, right? In school, you study geometry, you study algebra, you study various kinds of mathematical calculations, right? But you don't use any of it anywhere. The moment you start a job, the first thing you use is Microsoft Excel.
Absolutely.
Now the question is, why are we not teaching Excel in school?
Right.
I don't remember solving an algebra equation from the time I started working, right? So I think there is a huge need for us to keep learning. I'm not saying good or bad, but all I'm trying to say is learn stuff that can be practically implemented. And like you had Einstein say, and so many others say, the human brain or the human mind has infinite potential. I'm not debating on what percentage of it do we end up using, but I think every day, even if you don't pick up a course, even if you don't pick up a certification, you would have seen my LinkedIn, I'm a behavioral scientist, right? What does it really mean? Two very fancy words, but in essence, it just means how do you consciously observe people? And by the sheer art of observing people, you can learn so much.
Tell us more about it.
Why make mistakes and learn? There are so many people around you who are making mistakes.
Right.
Just observe them doing what they do and tell yourself, I won't do that.
I actually have a question related to mistakes. Mistakes are, in my opinion, inevitable. So the question was framed as, in the present scenario, new students who are entering the workforce, young adults, what mistakes are they making and how should they not make them?
I think that's a very, very good and pertinent question. And in a couple of roles that I've played in my life, I've interacted very, very closely with early talent. And I think many a times I have noticed and observed that students who enter the corporate world have a chip on their shoulder. You know, they believe that just because they've done an MBA, they would want to do strategy from day one. It doesn't work that way. Trust me, it doesn't. Because even today, as much as we may debate this topic, there is still a gap between what industry wants and what academia is offering, right? Of course, the gap has reduced significantly, but still there is a massive gap. Now, if you're going to walk in with a chip on your shoulder, with an attitude of, oh, I know it all, you're closing the doors to learning. And my humble request, it's a very humble request to every student passing out, is to keep curiosity at the center of everything that you do. I spoke about it at the TEDx talk a short while ago. And I very, very firmly believe in this, because when you're curious, you will ask questions. When you ask questions, you will learn things that otherwise you didn't know. And if you make that part of your DNA, you will be able to give answers to those who can't ask questions but have questions just by sharing.
Other than that, there is a shift in the working scenario from what it was in the 90s, in the 2010s, and undeniably there'll be a shift in the next 10 years, in a decade, in 2 decades. So how do students like me, a lot of college students that are going to be hearing this podcast, prepare for this future of work?
Beautiful. I think the question that you've asked is not just for the present, but also for the future. I'll break this up into 3 parts. It doesn't matter what stream you choose, all right? You could be choosing a technical stream, a non-technical stream, it's absolutely all right. But what is very important is you need to have 3 things in place. One is what I call the breadth. Can you really talk about as many topics under the sun as you're building your conversational knowledge? Second, can you build depth So very difficult to build depth in every sphere. But whatever is your area of domain, whatever is an area of interest to you, in whichever area you want to build your career, you have to have in-depth knowledge. Who was the father of that subject? What has happened over the years? How has the entire science or the art of that subject changed? What's happening today? And most importantly, can you have a point of view, a POV that we keep seeing on Insta? A POV about the future. Right or wrong, debatable. But you need to have a point of view, right? And that's the depth that I'm referring to.
Okay.
And the third pillar is, whether we like it or not, tech is going to be all pervasive. So you can't say that, oh, you know what, I don't know how to work with tech, or I find this difficult, or I don't know latest tools like Tableau, I find it difficult, I don't want to dirty my hands with it. You will have no choice but to understand technology, because the future is not going to be a challenge between AI and humans. The future is going to be a challenge between humans who know AI and humans who don't know AI. And therefore, tech is all pervasive. So, summarizing a long answer to your short question, we need to ensure that the future of our country, the future of the world, needs to build breadth. In their areas of focus, build depth, and an overlaying layer of technology in the sphere of work.
I've gathered from your profile that you're also a very passionate advocate for inclusion and diversity. Tell us more about your interest here. Any remarkable experiences?
I think many a times, many of us experience stigma. And there could be stigma of various forms and shapes. You could have a situation where in a particularly female-dominated industry, men don't feel included.
Absolutely.
You could have a situation where in a country like ours, language can actually be lack of inclusion. Because if you walk into a room with 10 people talking one language and you don't understand that language, they may think, oh, this guy knows it. But that's an assumption. Why won't everyone talk in a language that everyone understands? And therefore, in my own small way, what I have tried to do is build inclusion. I'll give you another very classic example, and this is not about me, but it's just about people who you surround yourself with. Because if you surround yourself with people who are of a particular mindset or a particular progressive mindset, automatically your thoughts also become very progressive. Just last week, I was at an event, and I had a very, very close friend of mine who heads inclusion, diversity, equity, equality for India's leading bank. And both of us were sitting together, and there was an award ceremony happening. And my friend just walked up close to the stage, requested the lady who was carrying the trophy and the memento to give it to a guy. And he asked that guy to go on stage and then hand it over to the chief guest who was distributing the awards. What a powerful thought. What a powerful thought. Just come to think of it, right?
It's breaking all the stereotypes that there are.
It is breaking stereotypes to the next level at an event where he would be being a recipient of an award, or so many people were getting awards, and suddenly the camera just spans across to say, hey, you're doing a conference on inclusion, diversity, equity.
Wow.
But you know what? Small gestures and small acts of kindness matter. And that's when you celebrate not just the whole cliche of a woman going on stage to give a trophy or a certificate, but why are you depriving a man of doing exactly the same thing?
I cannot agree more with this point. So, having a wealth of experience in this industry, at this point, what do you think is more important for you, and for you as an HR manager, and for us as students? Being tremendously good at what we do, or having a sense of loyalty, responsibility, aligning our purposes with the company, being disciplined and ethical? Which one is more important?
So, to my mind, ethics is zero tolerance, right? You either have it or you don't have it. Many people say कि यार मैंने तो सिर्फ 10 रुपए की चोरी करी. चोरी चोरी होती है. आप 10 रुपए की करो या 10 करोड़ की करो, right? So either you're ethical or you're not ethical. You can't be in between. So let's keep ethics aside. The other two aspects that you called out, I think many people who I talk to and who I interact with, in their mind, think of it as a binary. It's either this or this. But I come from a world where it is this and this. And to be a successful professional, you need to have both. And loyalty, I'm picking on one word that you used.
Yeah.
I think loyalty, the definition of the word loyalty needs to significantly change. Loyalty is not about spending 10 years, 20 years, 30 years in an organization warming the chair. Loyalty could also be spending just 2 years in an organization and exceeding expectations on the mandate for which you were hired. To my mind, the person's come in, focused agenda, not just met expectations but also exceeded expectations, and now has moved on to do something else. I think many a times we associate words with other words, to my mind, that are not the right way to do it. Loyalty does not mean time or tenure. Loyalty means, are you committed to deliver in that moment to the best of your ability and create an impact? And if you're doing that, you're loyal to your job, you're loyal to your organization. You may spend 10 years in that organization not being loyal, not doing as much work as you're expected to do, not creating the impact that you have to do. Is that called long service award or loyalty? I don't think so.
Okay, so well enough. Thank you for answering this so well. Coming to that, we are at the conclusion of this podcast. So with that, we conclude this amazing episode of the NMIMS podcast. That was Mr. Sahil Nayar, Senior Associate Director at KPMG India. And that was your host, Srishti Jaisinghania, checking out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Srishti. Thank you.